Last winter in January, I was coming home around 11 p.m. after evening shift at Seminary Co-op Independent Bookstore in Hyde Park, Chicago, where I worked part-time to help with grad school expenses in literature. I live in Pilsen, a Latino neighborhood on the southwest side that people from other parts of the city always warn you about. I grew up here, my grandma lived here, my parents still live a few blocks away, and I know the corner stores and the people who hang out outside them. So I do not walk around like I am sightseeing, but I also do not act like nothing bad ever happens. That night was cold, around 10 degrees, and the streets were empty. The only people out were the ones with jobs that do not care about weather, or the ones who did not have anywhere else to go. I remember being annoyed because my scarf kept slipping, and I was thinking about whether I should stop taking late shifts next semester. When I turned into my building's little gate area, I could hear someone coming up behind me fast. As I got my key in the front door, a man in a winter jacket rushed up right on my shoulder and caught the door before it closed. He looked about 40, maybe older, but it was hard to tell because he had a knit hat pulled low and a scarf covering his mouth and nose. He said, "Hey, hold it," like he was out of breath, and I did, because it is normal here for someone to be locked out or just trying not to mess with frozen keys. We stepped into the warm vestibule with the mailboxes and the old radiator that hisses steam all winter. I held the inner door too, on autopilot, and he slid in after me. He did not say thank you. He just looked past me like he was already late for something, which made me feel a little stupid for being polite, but I still told myself it was nothing. Our building is divided into an east and a west side, each with its own stairs and elevator because of some weird renovation decades ago. I live on the west side, apartment 5WB, and I know most people on my half by face. Mrs. Garcia on the first floor with 3 cats, the Martinez brothers on the second, a young couple on the fourth with a baby who cries like clockwork. I did not recognize this guy, so I assumed he lived on the east side where I rarely go. At the elevator in the common vestibule there was another tenant, a young Latino guy in a puffer jacket with headphones on. I could hear the bass through them, and he was staring at his phone like the world could be on fire and he would not notice. I did not recognize him either, but people move in and out all the time, and seeing a third person there made me relax a fraction. When the old elevator finally clanked open, the 3 of us stepped into the tight cabin with the worn wooden panels. I pressed the button for the 5th floor, my usual floor, then kept my hand on my bag strap like it was normal to be that stiff. The young guy pressed 6 without looking up. The man with the scarf stood behind us for a second, then moved in close to the panel. This is the part that still bothers me because it was so small, and I almost missed it. His gloved hand came up and his finger hovered over the 5 button, the exact one I had just pressed that was already glowing orange. He stopped, like he had not expected it to be lit yet, and for a beat, he just held his finger there, not pressing anything. My stomach tightened because I understood what that meant before I could talk myself out of it. He did not know my floor until he saw what I picked. Then he slowly, very slowly lowered his hand and stood in the elevator corner looking at the doors. I knew he didn't live on my 5th floor. West Side only has 4 units. Mine, the Chens, Mr. Browning, and Kara. I know them. This man wasn't one of them. And if he lived on the East Side 5th, he'd have his own hallway, so there was no normal reason for him to step out on my stop. The elevator groaned upward. I stared at the floor numbers and kept my face blank, like I hadn't noticed anything. My back started sweating under my coat. The guy with headphones kept scrolling. The man in the corner stayed still, but I could feel him watching me. At 5, it dinged, and the doors crawled open. He stepped out first, fast, then turned and held the door with his glove, looking at me like, "Come on." I didn't move. I didn't reach for my keys. Every part of me was yelling, "Don't step out. Don't go into that hallway with him. Stay where there's a witness." I tried to think of a polite excuse, but my brain kept stalling. We just stared at each other for a few seconds. His eyes were flat and cold, and his face didn't change. I heard the headphone guy pause his music, like he was finally paying attention. The man let go, and the doors closed. Right after, I heard heavy footsteps, quick, headed left to the stairwell, not toward any apartment. The stairwell door screeched when he yanked it open, and then the steps thudded down fast, like he was taking them 2 or 3 at a time and didn't want to be seen. The headphone guy pulled an earbud out. "You okay? Why didn't you get off?" he asked. I wanted to tell him everything. The button, the man holding the door, the stairs, but my throat tightened and I couldn't get it out. I nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Wrong floor. I need a different one." It sounded dumb. He shrugged, put the earbud back, and got off at 6. As soon as he was gone, I hit 5 again and went back down. The hallway was empty. I looked toward the stairwell door and listened, but there was nothing. I rushed to my door anyway, fumbled my key once, got inside, and locked everything. Lock, deadbolt, chain. I stood there with my back on the door, breathing hard. Then I remembered my parents were in Mexico for 2 weeks, visiting family, so I was alone. If I'd stepped out and he'd followed me, there wouldn't have been anyone to hear it or help. I called my mom and woke her up, and my dad got on the phone after. I was shaking and crying. My mom kept asking if I was locked in, and my dad told me to keep the door locked. She offered to come home early, and I told her not to because of my grandma's celebration and because I was safe inside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my lap, phone in my hand, checking the locks over and over. It's been more than a year, and I still watch elevator buttons like it's my job. I stand where I can see the panel and the doors, and if something feels off, I'm ready to get off anywhere. Maybe he was just confused and ran down the stairs to avoid a weird moment. But my body knew something before my brain could argue it, and not stepping out on 5 is the only decision from that night I'm grateful I made. Few years back at 24, I worked bartender at Rusty Bolt, small dive bar in Tulsa Industrial District, squeezed between auto parts warehouse and diesel engine repair shop. There weren't any houses nearby, not within half a mile, just gray buildings, trucks, and lots full of equipment. After work, the area emptied out fast. During the day, we got lunch crowds from the shops, mechanics, welders, truck drivers, sometimes guys in hard hats who only wanted coffee to warm up in winter. It was boring in a predictable way, which was honestly fine by me. One Tuesday around 2 in the afternoon, the bar was almost empty. 2 older guys were on the far wall playing darts and arguing about the score like they always did. I was washing glasses, half listening, when a man came in. He looked about 50, wearing faded blue coveralls with an embroidered patch that read, "Tony's Auto Repair." Big build, beer gut starting, gray hair cut short, hands stained with oil. He ordered a large black coffee and sat on a stool right across from me. He started with the usual talk. How long had I worked here? Did I like it? Was it busy at night? I answered the way we're trained, short and friendly but not encouraging. About a year. Yeah, it's fine. He kept going anyway, and the questions got personal fast. Where did I study? Did I have a boyfriend? Did I live with my parents? What music did I like? Then he asked if I'd been in the military, which was so random it made my shoulders tense. After that, it was plans for the future, like he was trying to map my life out. Each time I answered, he nodded and repeated it back under his breath, like he was saving it. At one point he said, "So you're from Oklahoma City, moved here a year ago," and he smiled like he'd solved something. When I said no boyfriend, he said, "No boyfriend, I see." like that mattered. I kept washing glasses and tried to move down the counter to check supplies, then to the other end to refill napkins that didn't need refilling. He stayed put, watching me the whole time. The dart guys never looked over. He finished that coffee slow, set a 20 on the bar for a $3 cup and said, "Keep the change, beautiful." My name tag said Emily. He didn't ask it, he just looked at it and left. After that, he started coming in every day, always around 2. Same stool, third from the edge, where he had a clear view of the whole bar and of me behind the counter. He only ordered coffee, never a beer, and he kept leaving 20s like it was nothing. In a week, he tipped me $140 for 7 cups of coffee, which was just stupid money for that place. I tried being less welcoming. One-word answers. Working at the other end, avoiding eye contact. He either didn't notice or acted like it was part of the routine. By the second week, he wasn't even asking new things. He'd circle back and make me repeat myself, like he was checking for mistakes. Still from Oklahoma City? Still no boyfriend? Still like that Metallica stuff? He'd nod, satisfied, and watch me while I poured coffee for other people. I kept trying to act normal because I'm not going to accuse a customer of being weird without something real. But every time the door opened near 2, my stomach did that drop thing, and I'd catch myself scanning the bar even when nothing was happening. One afternoon, I clocked out and walked behind the building to the employee lot. My Honda Civic was parked where it always was, and I saw a white card tucked under the windshield wiper. It was inside a clear plastic bag, like someone wanted it kept clean. The handwriting was neat, blue ink. It said I reminded him beauty still existed, and asked if we could talk sometime outside work, maybe dinner Friday, and that he knew a good place. Signed, Tony. I took the card off my windshield and went straight back inside with it. Carl was in the little office behind the bar doing paperwork, and I felt stupid standing there like I was tattling, but my hands were shaking, so I just put it on his desk. He read it once, then again, and his face tightened. Carl was about 40, forearms covered in old tattoos, and he had that tired calm you only get after years of dealing with drunk people. He said, "Okay, this crosses a line. I'll talk to him." The next day, Tony came in at his usual time. Same coveralls, same calm walk, like it was just another lunch break. Before he could sit, Carl stepped out and met him at the far end of the counter. They talked low, and I couldn't hear much, but I saw Tony nodding, spreading his hands, looking embarrassed. Carl came back and said Tony apologized, said he didn't mean to scare me, and promised to stop. Tony left without ordering coffee and didn't come back the rest of that week. I started relaxing and telling myself it was handled. A week later, I got off an evening shift around 11 and walked home. I lived close, in a little rented bungalow, and I never told customers where. When I turned onto my block, I saw an old blue Ford F-150 parked across from my house. The Tony's Auto Repair sticker in the back window made my stomach drop. The engine was off, but there was a dark shape in the cab. It wasn't a random delivery truck. It was him, sitting there. I didn't go up to my porch. I kept walking like I was headed somewhere else, trying not to show I'd noticed. My phone was already in my hand. I took a picture of the truck, then leaned like I was checking a text and snapped the license plate. Oklahoma DXF 7821. Then I turned around and walked back the way I came, fast but not running, and went straight back to the rusty bolt. Carl was still inside counting receipts. When I told him, he didn't question it. He called the police and stayed on the line until an officer showed up. I filed a harassment report and handed over the photos and the note. He wrote it down and asked me to repeat the plate out loud, like he wanted no mistakes. The officer ran the plate and told us it was registered to Anthony Marcus DeLuca, 52, owner of Tony's Auto Repair on 41st Street. He went there the next day and talked to Tony. Tony admitted he'd been in my neighborhood and tried to call it a coincidence. The officer asked about his life, found out he'd been married 28 years, had a daughter about my age, and no record. None of that made me feel better. The officer warned him formally to stay at least 100 yards from me and not to come near the bar, my house, or my car. I quit the Rusty Bolt a month later and got a job in another neighborhood at a place with security at the door. I also moved into an apartment complex with a code on the gates. 2 years have passed and Tony never approached me again. But sometimes I'll see a blue F-150 with an auto shop sticker and my heart jumps. I grip the wheel, change routes, and check my mirrors until I'm sure it's not behind me, because I learned the hard way that harmless conversations can be not so harmless as they seem at first glance. The guy knew what car I drove, even though I never told him. He said he saw my black Nissan on the back lot a couple hours earlier. I was 24, working the front desk at a 24/7 car wash, and my whole job was boring on purpose. Take payment, print receipt, point people to the bay, call Raul if a hose exploded. That was it. So when this stranger said, "Your Nissan," like we were friends, my stomach tightened. I kept my face neutral and asked, "You want the basic wash again?" He smiled and leaned on the counter, waiting. 3 weeks before that, my coworker Ashley called me crying after her shift. She worked the same desk, same nights, just at the other location. She kept apologizing, saying she might be overreacting. Then she told me about a new customer in his 40s with a beat-up gray Ford F-150. He spent almost an hour at the wash and kept coming back inside. First he asked about services, then about the schedule, then personal stuff like what shifts she worked and whether she had a boyfriend. She stayed calm because he paid, but her voice shook when she said, "Enough." She said he finally left, so she tried to forget it. Next night he came back and parked at the far end of the lot, not in a bay, just sitting there. She watched him through the glass while she cleaned the counter and pretended she wasn't scared. After 90 minutes, she called our manager. The manager called the cops. The cops showed up, drove through, and the truck rolled out slow. Ashley asked if they could do anything, and the officer told her he wasn't trespassing or threatening anyone. They said she should call again if he came back. After his third visit, Ashley asked me to swap shifts. She said she couldn't do nights anymore, and said she couldn't handle the late hours, not after that guy. I said yes, even though my first thought was, why am I doing this? But we both needed the work, and the night shift paid $2 more an hour. Also, I wasn't totally alone. Raul, our mechanic, worked in the shop wing most nights fixing broken vacuums and the conveyor. If I yelled, he could be at the front door fast. That was the story I kept telling myself anyway. First night on my new schedule, the gray pickup rolled in around 2 a.m. I saw it through the glass, and my mouth went dry. He came to the counter like he owned the place, ordered a basic wash, then stayed there. He asked if I was new, how long I'd worked there, and if I liked the job. I kept my answers short and stared at the screen while I rang him up. My hands shook, so I tucked them under the counter between taps. He smiled and said, "See you around," like we already knew each other well. Over the next 5 nights he showed up like clockwork, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Sometimes he'd wash his truck, sometimes he'd just park and sit, then come inside to talk. He asked about the weather, about work, about my schedule, and then little things that weren't his business. Did I live close? Did I have roommates? Did I get rides home? I kept everything vague. Yeah, nearby. No, just me. Depends. I started writing his plate number on scrap paper, not even sure why, just doing something. Every time the door chimed, I looked up expecting him again. That's when he mentioned my Nissan. I never said I drove a Nissan. My car was on lot behind the building, where customers don't go. He'd been watching me, matching me to it. At 6 a.m., I asked Raul to walk me out and I told him. Raul said, "Tell the manager, call the cops." I knew that wouldn't help without threats or trespassing. Next night when he showed up, I said I sold the Nissan and bought a white Jeep Wrangler, and that I parked it up front now because I liked my car visible, felt safer that way. I also lied and said my schedule changed. Now I left at 5 a.m. instead of 6, because management was cutting night hours to save money. He listened carefully, like he was trying to lock it in. He asked about the Jeep again, what year it was, what trim, how much I paid, and where I bought it. I answered like I had receipts, even though I was inventing it on the spot. I said it was a white Wrangler, used, nothing fancy, and I threw out a price that sounded believable. My heart was pounding hard enough I thought he'd hear it, but I kept my voice flat and friendly. He nodded, smiled, and kept poking. Did I park it up front? Did I feel safer? Did I live close enough to walk if it broke down? I gave short answers and slid his receipt toward him, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He stayed by the counter until Raul walked through the lobby, and only then did the guy turn and head back outside. He didn't wash his truck right away. He just stood by the driver's door and looked toward the entrance spots. That evening I called Carlos, our day shift manager. Carlos drove a white Jeep and always parked up front because he liked it on camera. I told him about Ashley, the gray pickup, the weird questions, and the Nissan comment. I said I'd fed the guy a fake story and I needed a real Jeep to sell it. I asked Carlos to come in at 5 a.m., park like normal, and wait inside with me. He cut me off and said, "Yeah, I'm in. If he's lurking, we'll catch it." I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, then hating myself for checking it, because it wasn't going to help. Around 4:45, I started going outside to check the vacuum stations. First at 4:45, then 5, then 5:10. It was normal work stuff, but I was really scanning the lot. I had pepper spray in my pocket, the one I bought after the first time he talked to me, and I kept my thumb under the cap the whole time. At 5:15, I saw the gray pickup on the far side of the lot where employees park. The guy was sitting in his truck watching Carlos's white Jeep by the entrance. He wasn't in a bay, and he wasn't making a call. He was just staring straight ahead, like he was waiting for a person to show up. I went back inside, locked the inner office door, and called Carlos. He answered and said he was already on his way. 10 minutes later, Carlos pulled in and parked his Jeep in his usual spot up front. We both stayed inside and watched through the window. The stalker got out of his truck, walked over to the Jeep, and started circling it. He leaned in and looked through the windows, then pulled out his phone and photographed the license plate. He did it slow, like he wanted it perfect. Carlos grabbed his own phone, called the cops, and then went outside and told him, loud, that this was private employee parking and he needed to leave. Police showed up 7 minutes later and wrote him up for trespassing. The far lot is for employees after 4 a.m. They told me to file a harassment report, and I did, and got a restraining order. I never saw him again, but for a month I watched cars, and I made Raul walk me out every shift. The only reason we weren't robbed the second time was because of 6 cheap motion sensors I bought at Best Buy for $89 each. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Marcus. I managed night shifts at a pharmaceutical warehouse in Texas where we stored expensive cancer medications and insulin. My job was receiving overnight deliveries, monitoring temperature controls, and making sure the building stayed secure. If a fridge alarm went off or a door got propped, it was on me. That night I was unloading a shipment with the truck driver when I heard metal scraping from the back corridor. Not a loud crash. More like someone dragging a tool along metal, slow and careful. The driver stopped talking and just looked at me, like he was waiting for me to say it was nothing. I told him, "Stay here," grabbed my flashlight, and went to check. I kept telling myself it was a loose panel or a pallet jack, because that's usually what it is. But the scraping didn't happen again, and that made it feel intentional. Then I stepped on something sharp. It poked through my boot enough to sting. I bent down and picked up a little metal shaving with a fresh-cut edge. When I stood, I felt cold air blowing down from above, like a draft in one spot that shouldn't have been there. I looked up and saw the ventilation grate hanging open, the same one I'd personally checked and secured a week ago. Professional tools were scattered on the floor below it. A drill, bits, a pry bar, screwdrivers. It looked like someone had set up to work and then bailed. I remember thinking, if they're still up there, I am not climbing into a shaft to prove it. I called the cops immediately and asked the truck driver to stay with me until they arrived. I told dispatch exactly what we stored and that we had controlled medications on site. We locked ourselves in the dispatch room, the only space with a reinforced door that needed a special key. He kept whispering, "Man, what is this?" And I just kept watching the hallway camera feed. 20 minutes felt like hours. When police finally showed up, we walked through the entire building together. Nobody was inside. But someone had come down through the roof ventilation shaft and moved around like they had time. There were boot prints and roof dust on the floor, and a couple of spots where you could tell someone had stood and looked around. They hadn't tried to grab product. Instead, they'd methodically photographed the locations of security cameras, the safe, and the high-value medication storage. A tech specialist also discovered 3 cameras in the north wing had been disabled that same night. Not smashed. Disabled. One of the officers said, "This is somebody planning a job." And he was right. The next 3 days I spent giving statements, helping with emergency inventory, and filling out endless insurance reports. We had to document what was exposed, what wasn't, and whether anything had been tampered with. Management kept using words like compliance and liability, but all I could hear was, "They're coming back again." The company hired a security firm for round-the-clock patrols immediately, but installing a complete new system would take a week minimum. They needed to order specialized equipment and get insurance approval. I asked for a transfer to day shift, but they had no replacement, so I had to keep working nights. Guards patrolled outside every 30 minutes, but inside I was alone, and that didn't make me feel safe. I barely slept between shifts. Every sound at home made me jump. On the 3rd day, I couldn't take it anymore and spent my own money on 6 portable motion sensors from an electronics store. I placed them throughout the warehouse, near emergency exits, in corridors, around the ventilation shafts. I connected them all to an app on my phone for instant alerts. The head of security didn't like it at first, said it violated protocol, but I convinced him it was temporary until the professional system got installed. The sensors were simple, but reliable. 4 nights later, around 2 in the morning, my phone started vibrating on the desk. I was in the dispatch room doing paperwork when the first alert popped up. Motion by the roof hatch. Then another sensor hit. Then another, marching down the same route toward the back corridor. I didn't have to guess what it was. That was the shaft where we'd found the tools. My hands went cold anyway. I called 911 and said, "This is the pharmaceutical warehouse. My motion sensors are showing movement inside, coming down from the roof. I'm locked in dispatch." While I stayed on the line, I grabbed the radio and hit the security channel. "Movement inside. North wing. Do not enter. Watch the roof and the lot." One guard answered right away, suddenly awake. "Copy. We're outside, moving now." Then I pulled the alarm. Every siren in the building started screaming, loud enough that I felt it in my teeth. Right after that, I flipped on all the warehouse lights at once, the big banks that make it look like a shift just started. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was trying to make them think they were already surrounded. I stayed behind the reinforced door. On my phone, the sensor alerts kept firing, but now the pattern reversed, fast, back toward the roof. On the one camera that still worked in the corridor, I saw two figures in dark clothes scrambling up into the open grate. One of them glanced back toward the lights like he couldn't believe it. They climbed like their lives depended on it. Outside, the guards were still on the radio. "We've got a van leaving," one said. "No plates." The other voice cut in. "It's heading for the highway." I relayed that to dispatch, still staring at the camera feed until it showed nothing but the grate swinging an empty floor. When the first patrol cars arrived, they took my statement and the guard's description, but the van was already gone. An officer knocked on the dispatch door, and I slid my key out through the slot. They shut off the siren panel, and the sudden quiet felt wrong. Two of them went straight for the back corridor, while another stayed with me and watched the camera replay on the monitor. He kept saying, "You did the right thing. Don't go out there." When they got to the roof, the grate was still open, but whoever came in was gone into the night. 2 weeks later, a detective called me at work. They'd arrested 3 people who'd been hitting warehouses and pharmacies for high-end meds, using roof access and camera interference. They didn't catch them because of our place alone, but the break-in pattern matched, and our report lined up with evidence from other jobs. He told me straight up, if you hadn't triggered the sirens and lit the place up, they would have had time to haul out a fortune. They found transport gear in their van, even cold boxes. After that, everything moved fast on the business side. Insurance reimbursed me for the sensors and, weirdly, cut me a small bonus for vigilance. The security firm upgraded their patrol plan, and corporate copied my setup to other sites until the full system was installed. I still transferred to day shift as soon as they hired someone for nights. I can do my job in a busy building. I can't do it alone under roof vents anymore. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd waited for approval and never bought those sensors myself. When Sarah turned on the kitchen light at 3 a.m. and saw an emaciated, middle-aged man rifling through their cabinets with a knife in his hand, she realized they weren't alone in the house. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah, 25, and her husband Jake, 27, had moved from the city into an old 2-story house at the edge of a small town. They did it for space, and because the rent was $600 a month, which felt impossible. The realtor said the place had sat empty almost 2 years after the previous owner's bankruptcy. They signed fast and didn't ask. The first days were normal, just boxes and small fixes. Jake tightened loose hinges, Sarah cleaned shelves, and they both kept saying how quiet it was. By the end of the first week, Jake went into the garage for tools and found 3 dirty sleeping bags shoved behind paint cans. Next to them was a pile of empty canned food, like someone had been eating there recently. Sarah stared at the mess with her arms crossed and said, "This isn't old. Someone used this." Jake took photos because he wanted proof. He checked the door lock twice, then went inside. Jake called the realtor right away, mostly so it was on record. To their surprise, the realtor came that afternoon. He looked through the garage, nudged a sleeping bag with his shoe, and said it was probably vagrants who slipped in when the house was empty. He sounded annoyed, not scared, which helped. They walked every room together, checked the windows, and found one latch that barely held. The realtor replaced the weak locks with sturdier ones and didn't charge them. After that, Sarah tried to relax, at least a little. They thanked him, shut the door, and felt safer. About a week and a half later, Sarah left groceries on the kitchen table in the morning before running out again. It was just a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. When she came home, they were gone. She checked the pantry and the fridge, then the trash. Like maybe she'd thrown them out by mistake. But nothing. Jake got home from work and swore he hadn't touched them. He said she probably put them away and forgot. Sarah snapped that she wasn't imagining it, and the argument got ugly fast. They went to bed angry, quiet. The next day, Jake's pack of cigarettes disappeared from the garage. He barely smoked, so he knew he hadn't finished them. He searched his car and coat, then said that it was weird. They tried to blame stress and moving, until Sarah found dirty boot prints leading from the basement window, across the kitchen, and toward the back door. She had mopped the night before. Jake grabbed a flashlight and checked the basement corner by corner, but found only old boxes and cobwebs. Sarah said, "Call the police." Jake refused, because his unpaid speeding tickets totaled about $2,000. Instead of calling anyone, Jake installed a heavy bolt on the basement door. He told Sarah they weren't overtired and seeing problems that weren't there, and he promised he'd pay the tickets later. The next 2 weeks were mostly quiet, but Sarah still felt watched, especially when she was home alone. She started double-checking locks without thinking. One night, Jake had an urgent project and worked late on the couch with his laptop. He wore headphones with white noise, the only way he could focus. Sarah went to bed around midnight, trying to ignore the tight feeling in her stomach. Sarah woke up to cabinet doors opening downstairs, slow and careful. She lay there, then remembered Jake was on the couch with headphones, and he couldn't hear anything. She went into the hallway and started down the stairs. In the light from the street lamp outside, she saw a large man in dirty clothes rummaging through their kitchen. Sarah screamed Jake's name. The man turned at once, and she saw an emaciated face, matted hair, and trembling hands. He moved toward them with a kitchen knife, muttering about his home and illegal occupiers, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. Jake ripped off his headphones, and for a second, his face went blank, like his brain was catching up. Then he saw the knife, saw Sarah on the stairs, and moved. He grabbed the baseball bat from the hallway closet, the one he bought after the sleeping bags in the garage, and stepped between her and the stranger. "Stop!" he shouted. "Put the knife down." The man did not stop. He kept coming, slow but certain, waving the knife and yelling that this was his territory. Jake did not swing like in a movie. He held the bat out like a bar and shoved at the man's chest to keep distance. The man lunged and clamped both hands on the bat. Sarah expected him to be weak because he looked half-starved, but he had strength in a desperate way. Jake yanked back. Their shoes slid. Sarah dialed 911 and blurted their address, and "A man is inside. He has a knife." The operator asked questions, but Sarah just kept saying, "Please hurry," and watching the blade. Jake grunted, trying to twist the bat free without letting the knife get close. The stranger's eyes were wide and unfocused, but his voice was sharp. He shouted, "My home," and "illegal occupiers," over and over. Jake told Sarah, "Get behind me," without looking back. Then it changed fast. The man let go of the bat like it burned him. Jake stumbled and caught himself on the counter. Sarah thought the man would stab him while he was off balance, but he spun toward the back door instead. He drove his elbow through the glass, unlocked the door from the inside, and ran into the yard. Blood smeared the frame and dotted the kitchen floor. Jake started after him on instinct, bat up, but Sarah grabbed his shirt and yanked him back. "No, don't chase him," she said, basically begging. The operator told her to get upstairs, lock a door, and wait. They locked themselves in the bedroom and sat on the floor with the bat across Jake's knees, flinching at every noise. The patrol car arrived about 40 minutes later. Officers cleared the house, An ambulance checked them for injuries and shock, and police took statements while dogs searched outside. The next day, a detective came back with a warrant and 2 assistants. They photographed the broken door, measured the basement window, and tested the grate. One assistant found a strange space behind the old boiler and pulled back a panel. A narrow passage ran behind the pipes. In that hidden area, they found a dirty mattress, clothes, canned goods, water bottles, and proof someone had been living there for a long time, entering and leaving through that weakened window. By that afternoon, the detective had a name: Gerald Walters, 63, a former caretaker from when a private shelter operated in the building. After it closed in 2018, Gerald was diagnosed with progressive dementia. He forgot where he was, did not recognize relatives, and kept escaping care placements, returning to the only place his brain still remembered. Police organized a search with dogs and a helicopter, and 2 days later, Gerald's body was found in the woods, 8 kilometers from town, dead from hypothermia and dehydration while trying to hide. Sarah and Jake packed that same day and terminated the lease. They only got the deposit back after threatening a lawsuit and news coverage, and even then, it felt dirty. They kept replaying fights about missing food. The realtor finally admitted he knew about Gerald and hoped locks would fix it. I was 18 when I finished a 6-month appliance repair course and got hired at a small service company called Quick Fix Appliances as a field technician. The work was simple. Customers called with a problem, the dispatcher assigned a tech. I'd drive to the address, diagnose the issue with a washing machine, dishwasher, fridge or dryer, fix it on site if possible, or take the appliance to the shop. They paid per job plus a percentage of the repair, which for a girl without a college degree was pretty good. On a good week, I'd make $600 or $700, and I didn't have to pretend I wasn't proud of that. Most customers were regular people, families, retirees, students, couples. They'd apologize like the broken thing was their fault. I learned to keep it simple, explain what I was doing, and keep the visit moving so I wasn't hanging around in a stranger's house for long. My boss Rick was in his 50s, and he'd been running the company for 20 years. First day, he did the usual briefing, showed me where parts were, how the van was stocked, who to call if I needed help. Then he leaned on the counter and said, "Main rule, and I'm not kidding, always leave the customer's front door open while you're working." He repeated it like 3 times, louder each time. Door open means you can run. Door open means someone hears you. Door closed means you're trapped. I nodded and told him I got it, and I did. The first month went smooth. I learned the common problems fast, learned the sounds a dying motor makes, learned how to explain a burned-out belt without making someone feel dumb. People were mostly polite and grateful. Sometimes they tipped me a few bucks, and I honestly needed it. Then about 5 weeks in, a name started popping up in my schedule over and over. David. Middle-aged guy. Lived alone in a big 3-bedroom apartment on the top 5th floor of an old brick building with no elevator. He called every week, sometimes twice, always minor stuff. Fridge makes a weird noise. Washer doesn't spin right. Dishwasher doesn't clean well. The dispatcher kept assigning me because I was close by and I had openings, and at first I didn't question it. First time I went was a Tuesday around 3 p.m. He opened the door looking exhausted, unshaven, wrinkled t-shirt, sweatpants. His place was cluttered, boxes everywhere, empty soda bottles, fast food bags, stacks of pizza boxes along the wall. It smelled like stale air, cigarette smoke, and something sour that made my nose wrinkle. He smelled too, sweat and tobacco and something else I couldn't name. Dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The fridge really was making a weird sound, but when I checked the compressor and fan, everything worked fine. It was just an old noisy model. I told him that. He nodded, said thanks, paid cash for the call-out, and I left. And for a minute, I honestly forgot about him. 4 days later, he called again. Now the washing machine didn't spin the laundry well. I went back, checked it, and it worked perfectly. Full spin, no wobble, no grinding, nothing. Another false alarm. I started thinking he was just lonely and calling texts for company. It happens, especially with older people, though he didn't look that old, maybe 45 max. What bugged me wasn't the wasted trips, it was how he acted while I worked. Most customers go do something else. David didn't. He'd sit on the couch or in an armchair and silently watch me. No questions, no small talk, no offer of water or coffee, just staring like he was trying to memorize me. It made me feel pinned in place, and I kept checking where he was whenever I turned. After that, I followed Rick's rule extra strict. I always left the front door wide open, put my tool bag by the threshold so I could grab it and run out. And sometimes I'd prop the door with a trash can from the hallway so it definitely wouldn't close accidentally. By the 5th or 6th call to David's place, I'd stopped being annoyed and started being cautious. That Friday was around 5 p.m., last job on my schedule, and of course it was him again. Fridge making weird noises, the dispatcher said, and I stared at his name a second longer than I should have. I thought about asking for someone else, then told myself it was a noise, not a crime scene, and I just wanted my weekend. I climbed the stairs to the 5th floor, knocked, and he opened the door in the same wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked tired in that dull way, like he hadn't slept, and he smelled like tobacco. The apartment looked worse than before. More boxes, more bags, more bottles, trash shoved into corners like he'd quit caring. I stepped in, kept the front door wide open, and dragged the hallway trash can over to wedge it like always. My tool bag went right on the threshold, handle facing out, and I kept my phone on me instead of tossing it in the bag. He barely spoke while I pulled the fridge out and took off the back panel. The compressor sounded normal. The fan spun. Nothing I could honestly fix. I messed with it a few minutes because "it's fine" sometimes turns into an argument. The whole time he sat in a worn leather recliner by the window and watched me. Not curious watching, just staring. Then he added, like it was nothing, "And the washer's not spinning right again." I said I'd check it quick. The washer was down a narrow hallway, jammed in a corner, and a laundry basket was wedged between it and the wall. I needed weight in the drum to test the spin, so I started moving clothes from the basket into the machine, keeping my shoulder angled so I could still see him in my peripheral vision. I was half turned when I heard footsteps. I looked back and he was walking toward the front door. No explanation. No, "Can you close that?" He just reached out and shut it. The latch clicked, then the deadbolt turned. I straightened up fast and stepped out from the washer corner into the hallway so I wasn't boxed in back there. My brain listed options. Talk first, don't run, don't make it worse. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "I need to keep the door open. It's a company rule." I smiled, which feels stupid now, but I didn't want to show fear. He leaned his shoulder against the door, arms crossed. "Draft," he said. "I'm cold. It's blowing from the hallway." It was late June, close to 90 outside, and his apartment was stuffy and hot. I took a careful step closer. "I understand, but I need it open," I said. "It's not negotiable. Please open it." My voice shook, and I hated that it did. He didn't move. He stared at me like he was waiting for me to do something. "Are you done with the repair?" he asked. "Almost," I lied. "I just need to grab some tools from my bag." I pointed to the bag sitting by his feet, right where I'd put it on purpose. He looked down at it, then back at me. The silence stretched. Then his tone went softer, almost dreamy. "You're always in such a hurry," he said. "You come, you do the work, you run away. Stay longer, check it carefully," he said. My phone rang, the dispatcher, and I lifted it and screamed for help. So this happened during summer break after my sophomore year of college when I was 21, and my boyfriend Mark was 23. We rented a small wooden cabin on the edge of a national park for 5 days, mostly to escape the city after a brutal semester of exams and papers. The cabin was simple, but honestly perfect. A porch with 2 old chairs, a fireplace inside, and a view straight into a pine forest. The nearest town with grocery stores and gas stations was about 20 minutes by car, which was far enough that you didn't hear traffic but close enough that we didn't feel stranded. The first 4 days were the kind of trip you post about, and then feel annoying for posting about. We hiked marked trails in the park, the ones with the little wooden signs and the maps at the trailheads. We cooked over a campfire behind the cabin, nothing fancy, just burgers and foil packets, and we ate on the porch. At night, we'd open a bottle of cheap wine and sit there talking about nothing, watching stars you never see back home because of light pollution. Friday evening, Mark's friend Dennis showed up with his girlfriend Jessica. They drove in from a nearby town called Pine Ridge, maybe 30 minutes away, and they acted like they'd known the place forever. Dennis brought extra beer, Jessica brought paper plates, and suddenly our quiet little cabin felt like a normal hangout. We grilled steaks on the porch, ate with our knees bumped up against the railing, and talked late into the night. Most of it was harmless. Summer jobs, who was taking what classes, where people might move after graduation. I remember Dennis saying, "You picked a good spot," like he was proud of us. Around 10 p.m., someone mentioned ice cream, and it sounded perfect in that lazy way ideas sound when you've been sitting and drinking for hours. Our freezer was empty, and Dennis said there was a 24-hour gas station with a mini-mart literally 5 minutes away if you walked. The only catch, he said, was you had to cut through the woods on an old trail instead of driving the long way around on roads. He pointed behind the cabin and explained that the trail started right there, went through a sparse stretch of pine, and you could see the gas station lights between the trees off to the right. "Locals take it all the time," he said. "It's quick, it's safe." Mark and I volunteered to go together while Dennis and Jessica stayed to clean up. I grabbed my small headlamp from my bag, and Mark took his bigger handheld flashlight, the one he always insisted was better. The moon was almost full, so the ground wasn't pitch black, but we used the lights anyway because roots and rocks are still roots and rocks. The air was warm and smelled like pine needles and earth, and I remember feeling relaxed walking next to him. That's the part that still annoys me, because I didn't have any reason to feel on edge yet. The trail was actually easy to follow. It wasn't some creepy animal path, just a narrow strip of packed dirt with needles pressed into it, like people really did use it. The pine trees were spaced out so you could see between them, and we kept catching that glow from the gas station through the trunks on our right. It made it feel closer than it probably was. Mark joked about getting the weirdest ice cream and making me taste it first, and I told him he was gross and laughed. We'd walked maybe 300 meters, maybe a bit more, when we heard a scream. A woman, short and sharp, coming from the left where the woods got thicker and there was no trail. We both stopped. Mark looked at me, then shouted, "Hello, are you okay? Do you need help?" Then a voice said she'd fallen, sprained her ankle, couldn't stand. Mark swept flashlight into the thicket. It hit trunks. She called again, saying she heard us, asking us to come closer, in a lot of pain. Mark started into the brush, and I grabbed his arm and stopped him. It wasn't bravery. It just felt wrong. If a woman really fell and sprained her ankle, why was it only a voice? No phone flashlight, no waving, not even trying to crawl toward the trail. Everybody has a phone. I whispered that to Mark, and he called out, "Do you have a phone? Turn on the light so we can see you, or tell us what you're next to." There was a pause, 3 or 4 seconds, way too long. Then she said her phone died when she fell, and we had to come closer, walk toward her voice. The tone got more demanding, and I felt goosebumps. Mark caught it too and looked at me. I said, "Describe where you are. Trees, rocks, anything." I also told Mark, under my breath, that a hurt person would be talking non-stop, not going quiet. Mark nodded and called back that we were calling for help, that park rangers would come with medical equipment, and she shouldn't move and make it worse. Her voice flipped like a switch. The pain vanished and she snapped, angry. "No, don't call help. Just come now. I need you to come now." Mark and I didn't argue. We turned around and fast walked back down the trail, not running but close to it. I looked back once and thought I saw a shadowy shape between the trees on the left, but it could have been branches and my own fear. Dennis and Jessica were still on the porch finishing beers. Jessica asked what happened, and we told them. Dennis tried to laugh it off, but his face stayed tight and he scanned trees. Dennis frowned and said strange people show up out here sometimes. He mentioned police finding an underground meth lab a few miles away a couple years back, and a mentally ill guy who attacked solo hikers until they caught him. Jessica said her friend had heard a similar help me voice story that was really a robbery trap. Mark called the National Park Ranger office. The duty ranger said he'd send a patrol to check the area. We sat on the porch, tense and quiet. About an hour and a half later, the ranger called back. They'd searched with strong flashlights and thermal imaging and found nobody. He said they swept the thicket, checked behind logs and in little dips in the ground, and still got nothing. No tracks, no dropped stuff. He told Mark these calls are rare, but they do happen near roads at night. No injured person, no camp, no sign anyone had been there. He said it was probably someone trying to lure tourists into an isolated spot for robbery or worse, and he praised us for not going into the thicket. We didn't get ice cream. Dennis and Jessica left around midnight. Mark and I locked the doors and windows, then shoved a wardrobe against the front door. We barely slept. We left the light on and kept our phones charged, like it would help. Every rustle and branch crack made us sit up. In the morning we packed and left a day early. More than a year later, I still hear how convincing that voice was at first, all shaky and hurt, and then how it turned cold and angry the second we didn't do what it wanted. I don't know who was out there or what would have happened if Mark had walked into that thicker forest, but I'm very glad I'll never find out. About 3 years ago, I was driving alone from Atlanta to Nashville for my younger sister Carol's wedding that was happening Saturday morning. I'm an HR manager at a big insurance company, and that Friday was insane. 3 interviews, a fight between 2 departments, and an urgent report for management. By 6 p.m. I was running on fumes, but I didn't want to delay because Carol needed help with final prep. The drive is about 4 hours. I plan to roll in around midnight, sleep at a hotel, and be useful instead of a zombie by morning and keep calm. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my Mazda, checked that I had my dress and the gift, and stopped for a large coffee at a gas station before getting on Interstate 24. The road was relatively clear, which was honestly the only nice thing about that day. I put on a podcast and just drove, kind of zoned out, taking sips even as the coffee cooled. Every so often, I'd glance at the clock and do that mental math like, okay, if I don't mess around, I'm fine. I wasn't texting, wasn't speeding, just trying to get there. Around 10 p.m. I'd driven roughly half the distance and decided to stop to stretch and grab some real food. The GPS showed a roadside motel called Sunset Inn, with a 24-hour restaurant a couple miles off the highway. The reviews were average, but I wasn't looking for a spa, just a sandwich that didn't come from a wrapper. I took exit 89 and followed a narrow 2-lane road into a small, sleepy town. There were sparse streetlights, closed shops, and nothing moving besides my headlights. For a second I wondered if I'd missed a turn, but the map insisted. When I reached the address, I saw an old 2-story motel building with a cracked neon sign, half the letters dead. The lot was empty, and there weren't any lights on inside. It looked closed for years. I cursed the GPS under my breath and started to turn around when I noticed a man by a corner window on the first floor. He was around 30, wearing a dark windbreaker and a black baseball cap, holding his phone out and taking pictures of the building from different angles. He'd step, snap a shot, lean close to the dirty glass, repeat. It was such a strange thing to see that late, and I stayed in my car. I kept turning around in the lot, slow, ready to leave. The man heard my engine and looked straight at me. No wave, no nod, just watching while he held the phone like he'd paused mid-task. Next to him was a white Honda Civic with a rectangular sticker on the back window, but it was too dark to read. I didn't sit there to figure it out. I accelerated and got back to the highway. On highway, I told myself it was nothing. Tiredness. 15 minutes later, I stopped at a big, well-lit Shell station. I filled my nearly empty tank, went into the convenience store, and bought a turkey sandwich, a bottle of water, and another coffee. I came back out and stood by my car with the bag in my hand, stretching my stiff back and neck after 3 hours behind the wheel. I remember thinking I should just eat, get back on the road, and stop checking my mirrors. I wanted Nashville, my bed, and the wedding to start. I kept my phone in my purse and focused on leaving soon. That's when I noticed a white Honda Civic pull into the station and stop at the far pump. Same model, same rectangular sticker on the back window. The guy in the baseball cap got out of the Honda and didn't start pumping gas. He headed straight for the store, passing my car 10 meters away. My heart started beating faster and I tried to talk myself down. White Civics are everywhere, and people share routes. But something inside told me it wasn't chance. That abandoned motel was in the middle of nowhere, off the highway, and now the same car here. I didn't even unwrap the sandwich. I got into the driver's seat, shut the door, hit the lock button twice, and pulled out of the station like I'd suddenly remembered something urgent. I merged back onto Interstate 24 toward Nashville and turned the radio up loud, the way you do when you're trying to drown out your own thoughts. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion and my brain trying to connect dots that weren't there. 3 or 4 minutes later, I checked the mirror and saw the white Honda. It was 3 cars behind me in the right lane. My stomach dropped anyway. I moved to the left lane, acting normal. A minute later, it moved left too. I dropped to about 55. It dropped too, holding the same gap. I sped up to 75 and passed 2 trucks. The Honda followed. My hands started sweating and I kept glancing at the mirror so much it probably made me drive worse. I kept saying out loud, "Stop it, it's just a car." But my stomach didn't listen. I hit the GPS and used voice search because my fingers felt clumsy. "Nearest police station," I said, and it pulled up the Williamson County Sheriff's Office with an exit in 8 miles. I stayed steady, watching the green signs, trying not to do anything sudden. The Honda stayed right where it had been. When the exit got close, I flipped on my hazards, like I was having trouble. I eased into the right lane, and then took exit 104 sharp and fast, heart pounding. In the mirror, the Honda's headlights dipped with me and came down the ramp. The surface roads were quiet, which made everything feel louder in my head. I followed the signs through a sleeping neighborhood with neat houses and trimmed lawns. I kept expecting it to pull alongside me or flash lights or do something clear. It didn't. It just stayed behind me, like it had patience. Then, out of nowhere, it turned into a Walmart parking lot. It didn't park. It looped around and headed back toward the highway in the opposite direction. I watched it go, still not trusting it, and kept driving straight to the sheriff's office. The building was a small, one-story brick place with lights on and a flag out front. I parked right by the entrance under a lamp and sat there with my hands on the wheel. I didn't call anyone. I just breathed until my pulse slowed down. I stayed about 20 minutes. I considered walking inside, but I didn't want to cry in front of strangers or be told to calm down. I texted Carol that I was close and safe, then put the phone away and watched the lot. Nothing moved. After that, I drove on to Nashville, constantly checking all my mirrors, but the Honda never showed again. I got to Carol's around 1 in the morning. She opened the door, took one look at me and said, "What happened?" I told her everything. She said, "You need to call the police." I promised I would first thing. Saturday morning, I called that sheriff's station and gave them the time window, the exits, the abandoned motel, and the white Civic with the sticker. The officer was polite but direct. Without plate numbers, without a threat, and without contact, there wasn't much they could do except log the call. I still don't know who that guy at the motel was, or if it was even the same car and I just stitched two random things together. But the photos at the motel, then the same car at the gas station, then the highway pursuit until I aimed for the police station felt like too much to be coincidence. I realized I wasn't heading to any security office when we stepped past the main market area, and all I could see was an empty parking lot with delivery trucks. This was 3 years ago, when I was 19, going to community college and working part-time. Every Saturday, I hit the big farmers market downtown for produce because it was cheaper than the store. That October day was packed, with pumpkins stacked everywhere and people holding cider like it was coffee. I'd just bought maple syrup from a farmer lady I knew and was walking toward the cheese stand. That's when a guy in his 40s came up in an orange reflective vest with staff on the back. He said his name was Diego, market security, and he spoke like he was running late. He told me someone had taken my bag that I'd left by the cheese stand about 10 minutes earlier. He said witnesses saw a guy grab it, and I needed to come to the security office right away to identify my things. He added that they'd already called the police, so there was no time to argue. I remember getting this dumb flash of confusion because my bag was right there on my shoulder. I even touched the strap and looked down like I was checking reality. I started to say, "My bag is literally here," but he talked right over me. He pointed off to the side and said it might be a similar bag, and I had to confirm before cops arrived. For a second, I actually doubted my own memory, like maybe I'd set something down and forgotten. He kept pushing that there was no time, saying the police would be there in 15 minutes. He said if these were really my things, I needed to get there first, or everything would be taken as evidence. I wanted to ask what the bag looked like, but he was already walking ahead, telling me to hurry. I followed because he looked official, and I didn't want to lose my stuff in some police process. We cut between vendor rows with him a few steps ahead, checking back to make sure I was still there. I tried to pull my phone out, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said no need to call. His grip was way stronger than it needed to be, and he kept saying the office was around the corner. I remember thinking I should have turned around right then, but I didn't want to seem dramatic, and he kept walking like he owned the place. He never showed me a badge once. After about 5 minutes, the crowd thinned out, and the music and chatter dropped behind us. We were heading toward the service area with delivery trucks and dumpsters, which made 0 sense for a security office. He kept looking around too much, eyes darting, and he angled us away from the camera poles. When I asked where we were going, he just waved and said, "There, by the parking lot." My heart started pounding because the real security office was near the main entrance, not out here. I slowed down and told him I changed my mind and would wait for the police in the busy area. He squeezed my shoulder harder and said we were almost there, just 20 more meters, like he was giving an order. When we stepped fully outside the market, I saw an empty parking lot and no people at all. There were only a couple delivery vans in the distance, and that was when full panic hit me. I understood I'd been tricked, and whatever he wanted was not my bag. I yanked my shoulder out of his grip, stepped back, and screamed as loud as I could for help. I yelled, "I don't know this person, help! He's trying to take me somewhere," and I kept repeating it. The sound echoed across the lot, and he froze, and his face went from friendly to angry in a second. He stepped toward me, but I backed toward the market, still screaming, and after a few seconds I heard voices. 3 shoppers and a security guard in a real uniform came running from around the corner of a building when I screamed. The guard had a radio on his shoulder and he started talking into it before he even reached us. He stepped between me and the man in the orange vest and said, "Ma'am, get behind me." One of the shoppers grabbed my arm and asked if I was hurt. I said, "He isn't security. He tried to walk me to the parking lot," and I kept pointing because my hands were shaking. The guy in the vest didn't answer. He just turned and walked fast toward the market, like he wanted to blend back in. The guard yelled for him to stop and ran after him, but the guy cut through the vendor stalls where it was crowded. I saw him pull the vest off over his head while he moved and toss it under a table. People were shouting because the guard was pushing through, and then the guy was gone. The guard came back frustrated and told another guard on the radio which direction he went. They took me to the actual security office by the main entrance. A guard wrote down my statement while another one pulled camera feeds. I gave them everything I could. His age range, build, the way he spoke, the grip on my shoulder, the baseball cap with the brim pulled low, and the sunglasses. On camera you could see him near the stands, but you couldn't really see his face. They asked me to watch the clip and say if I recognized him, but it was mostly his posture and the way he leaned in. He always kept his chin tucked like he knew it. When they tried to check the far parking lot area, they said those cameras had been broken for 2 weeks, and the repair kept getting delayed. A guard came back with the orange vest and a bag. Up close, it was a cheap fake, probably bought online. The staff was just printed paper, like someone used a regular printer and stuck it on. One of the guards told me quietly that this was the 3rd similar case in 2 months. The story changed, but the trick was the same. Act official, say police are coming, and hurry a woman away from the crowd toward the service area with trucks. They said the guy changed his appearance and moved fast, and the broken cameras didn't help. The police were actively looking, but they still hadn't caught him, and later they never found him. After that, I stopped treating the market like it was this harmless Saturday thing. I don't go alone anymore. Ever. If I need to go, I bring a friend or my boyfriend, and if nobody can come, I skip it. If anyone in any kind of uniform tells me to follow them, I ask to see a work badge with a photo, and I call the official security number myself instead of letting them lead me somewhere. I watch where the cameras are, which sounds paranoid, but I learned how easy it is for someone to steer you around them. I still flinch when I see orange vests, and for months after it happened, I couldn't eat anything that smelled like cinnamon, because that was all over the market that day, and it made my stomach flip. I still don't know what that man was planning, walking me out to an empty parking lot with vans, and honestly, I'm glad I don't know. During the summer of 2019, when I was 24, I sold my tech startup and decided to spend 8 months driving across the country in a used RV. Me and my business partners Brandon and Jason had just sold our warehouse logistics platform to a big corporation after 3 years of working basically non-stop, sleeping 4 hours a night and barely seeing our apartments. Brandon and Jason flew to Europe. I wanted to see real America away from the highways and tourist traps. I planned a route through national parks and obscure places, and one stop was northern Alabama, where my cousins Connor and Ethan lived. They worked as rangers in a huge nature preserve, over 100,000 acres, doing patrols, maintaining trails, and managing wildlife populations. I hadn't seen them since we were kids, maybe 10 years old. They invited me to stay for 2 weeks. I took it because living in an RV gets lonely fast. It's a lot of quiet, a lot of eating alone, and a lot of staring at maps in parking lots, wondering why the freedom you wanted also feels like isolation. 2 weeks with family sounded like a reset. The first week was great. They showed me hidden trails that regular tourists never found, waterfalls not in any guidebooks, and fishing spots where you could catch trout the size of your arm. Connor told stories about bears and wild boars they encountered on patrols, usually ending with a reminder about what not to do. Ethan shared photos of sunrises over the mountains, taken on shifts that started way before I was even awake, and he just shrugged like it was normal. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually relaxing, not thinking about code or investors or deadlines. I kept checking my phone out of habit, then remembering there was nothing to check. Connor noticed and said, "Man, you look like you're detoxing." I laughed, but it stung a little because he was right. On the second week, the guys suggested a 3-day camping trip to this remote mountain lake where they sometimes did patrol rounds. The place was 20 miles from the nearest paved road, and you could only get there in a 4-wheel drive truck. We rented a small forestry cabin on the shore, just a primitive building with a wood stove, bunks and a table, no electricity or plumbing. We took water from the lake and boiled it, used lanterns and campfires for light. There was no cell service, which weirdly made me feel safer and more exposed. The first day and evening were perfect. We fished and cooked over the fire, told life stories, and enjoyed the complete silence. I talked about the sale, about sleeping under my desk sometimes, and how weird it felt to suddenly have time. Connor asked, "So what now? You gonna start another one?" I said, "Maybe, but not soon." Ethan didn't make jokes. He just listened and said, "Good," like he meant it. The second day we hiked a 10-mile loop through mountain trails, and by evening I felt this pleasant muscle fatigue. When it got dark, and the guys built up the campfire to discuss tomorrow's plans, I kept staring at the lake. The water was totally calm, and the stars were bright with zero light pollution. I had my camera with me, and I wanted a few photos, mostly because I'd been telling myself this trip was about doing things that didn't earn money. So I told them, "I'm gonna walk the shore alone for a bit to photograph the night scenery. I'll be back." Connor looked up and went, "Don't go far," half joking, half serious. Ethan said, "Keep your light on." I grabbed my camera and a small flashlight and walked along the lake alone. I walked maybe half a mile down the shore trail, taking long exposure shots, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the silhouette of a tall man, over 6 feet, coming up the trail fast. I figured it was another camper, maybe someone lost, and I was about to say hello when he suddenly lunged at me. Everything happened in a second. He tackled me so hard the air shot out of my lungs, and his hands locked around my throat. I swung at him, scratched, tried to twist away, but he was way stronger. I'm 160 on a good day, and I sit at a desk. He felt like solid muscle. I got one arm free, punched him in the face, then screamed for help. The scream came out thin because of his grip. The attacker didn't say a word. He just breathed hard and squeezed harder, face totally blank in the moonlight. No threats, no noise, nothing. My wallet was still in my pocket. My camera was on the ground. He wasn't reaching for either. He was just choking me. I clawed at his cheek and reached for a rock a few inches from my hand. My fingers touched it once, then he shifted and pinned my arm. My vision started narrowing, like a tunnel. I could hear my breathing getting weaker while his stayed steady. Then light cut through the trees, two strong beams bouncing fast. Connor and Ethan. Connor yelled my name. Ethan yelled, "Get off him!" The guy didn't even glance at them. Connor grabbed his shoulder and tried to pull him back, but it was like he'd welded himself to me. Ethan already had his service firearm out. I'd seen it on his belt all week because of bears and aggressive wild boars, and I never pictured it aimed at a person. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air and shouted, "Let him go now!" The crack echoed off the lake. The attacker didn't flinch. He didn't pause. His hands kept crushing my throat like the sound meant nothing. Connor looked at Ethan and just said, "Ethan." That was all. Ethan aimed low and shot him in the leg. The man finally let go. I rolled onto my side and coughed until I gagged. I expected screaming, or cursing, or anything. He stayed absolutely silent. He stood up, wobbling, and I saw a dark stain spreading on his jeans. His face stayed empty, like pain didn't connect. Limping, he turned and ran into the dark forest and disappeared between the trees. But before he vanished, he stared at me for several seconds with this cold, blank look. Connor and Ethan dragged me back toward the cabin. Connor kept saying, "Breathe, Kyle. Talk to me." I nodded because talking hurt. Ethan was on the radio, calling it in, voice steady, but his hands shook when he reloaded. Police and rangers arrived about 40 minutes later with search dogs. They found a blood trail leading to an old hunting camp 2 miles from the lake, an abandoned shack with the remains of a campsite, but they never found the man himself despite searching until dawn. The amount of blood showed the wound was serious, but not fatal. The bullet went through his calf muscle. Police said it could have been a local with mental problems hiding in the woods, or an escaped criminal from neighboring states, possibly connected to meth production, which they said was common in those remote Alabama hills. I left the preserve early. Connor and Ethan didn't argue, and that alone told me how bad it was. I keep replaying the quiet part more than the violence. No words, no hesitation, no reaction to the warning shot. It felt like he had one goal, and everything else was background noise. I still travel, but I don't separate from people at night anymore. And I don't assume remote means safe. When I was 23, I moved into a rental house on the outskirts of a small town in Montana after breaking up with my boyfriend and looking for a place to start over and work remotely in peace. I'm a data analyst, so as long as the internet is fast and the power stays on, I can do my job from anywhere. The rent was low, the landlord didn't ask questions, and there were no shared walls. The nearest neighbors were about 200 meters away, which sounded perfect. I wanted quiet, and I told myself that was the point. The first 2 months were almost boring in the best way. I worked, cooked, binge-watched dumb shows, and slowly stopped checking my phone for messages from my ex. The house was older, so it had normal sounds. Pipes, the furnace, wind. In mid-March, I woke up to floorboards creaking in the hallway, slow like someone shifting their weight. I grabbed my phone flashlight and checked every room. Doors locked, windows shut, nobody there. I blamed temperature changes, told myself I was jumpy, and went back to bed. In the morning, I laughed about it during a call and moved on. A week later, I heard the creak again, and I knew right away it wasn't just the house. I went to the kitchen first and saw the back door cracked open. I had locked it. I was sure. On the table, my wallet was sitting open like someone had dumped it out and then put it back together. I counted the cash I kept behind my cards. $80 was gone, but my cards and ID were still there. My stomach dropped because it felt deliberate, not random. I stood shaking, listening for footsteps, and wishing I hadn't moved alone. I called 911 with my hands shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, so I locked myself in my bedroom and waited. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later and searched the house and yard with flashlights. They found boot prints in the mud by the back entrance and scratches around the lock. The older officer said someone probably picked it with a tool. Before they left, he told me to get an alarm system and add extra locks, because isolated houses get targeted. Said, "Don't wait for it to get worse." The next day, I ordered a smart home system with cameras for every entrance, motion sensors, and alerts that would hit my phone instantly. I didn't want to rely on hearing creaks anymore. I also bought high-security locks for each door and put latches on every window. Installing everything took most of the afternoon, and I kept messing up the instructions, but I didn't stop. I kept thinking about someone standing in my kitchen while I slept. When I finally saw all the cameras showing live feeds, I felt a little control again. I wasn't, but I was prepared now. For the next 3 weeks, nothing happened. No open doors, no missing money, no footsteps in the hallway. I started sleeping through the night again and stopped replaying the police officer's words on a loop. I still checked the locks, just not obsessively. I even caught myself thinking it had been a one-time thing, some opportunist who got lucky and moved on. Early April proved me wrong. I woke up to my phone buzzing like an alarm clock I didn't set. The notification said the back motion sensor had triggered at 3 a.m. Throat went dry before I opened it. I opened the app and pulled up the camera feed, asleep, but suddenly wide awake. The back porch view showed a person in dark clothes with a balaclava pulled tight over their face. They were right up at the door, hands working the handle, then the lock, like they expected it to give. I didn't scream. I didn't call out. I slid out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my nightstand. My thumb hovered over the big red button, and I turned on the siren through the app. A piercing wail shattered the night silence. My hands were sweaty, and I almost dropped my phone dialing 911. I told the dispatcher I was alone. Someone was at my back door, and I could see them on the camera. She made me confirm the address twice, then asked if I could lock myself in a room. I said I was in my bedroom with the door locked and a baseball bat in my hand. She told me not to go investigate, not to yell, just keep watching the feed and stay on the line. I kept thumb hovering over the siren button, listening to it wail. On the screen, the figure jerked away from the handle like the noise hit them. They looked left, then right, shoulders hunched, and back down the steps fast. For a second, they paused near the corner of the house, like they were deciding whether to try a window. Then they slipped into the darkness behind the building. I flipped through the other cameras, front porch, driveway, side yard, trying to catch a face, but it was just empty angles and bad night vision. The dispatcher stayed on, counting minutes with me. When blue lights flashed, I cried and didn't stop. The officers were inside within minutes, asking my name and if I was hurt. One stayed with me while 2 did a sweep, then they all went to the back door together. I showed them the clip. The camera caught only a silhouette and gloved hands. No face, no plates, nothing useful. Outside, one officer crouched by the new deadbolt and ran his flashlight across it. The metal was chewed up with deep scratches, tight and deliberate. He said whoever did it had tools and time. "Your siren scared him off," he told me. He called it a break-in. They didn't find anyone around the house, and after a few more questions, they left me with a case number and the same advice. Keep the system armed, keep lights on, call again if anything changes. When the door shut behind them, the house felt smaller. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the back entrance like it was a TV screen that might turn on by itself. Someone had been inside once, and now they were back prepared. I kept thinking about how I'd been asleep 10 minutes earlier. I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. By myself. 2 days later, I met my landlord and laid it out. No dramatics, just facts. Open door, money gone, lock scratched, masked person on camera. He didn't argue. He said he understood and would terminate the lease without penalty. He even offered to send a handyman like that would make me change my mind, but he didn't push when I said no. I packed fast and moved into an apartment downtown, a multi-unit building with a concierge and security. There were cameras in the lobby and elevators. It cost 1.5 times more, but I could breathe. About 2 weeks later, I saw a story about burglaries on the outskirts, and it named the same area I'd rented in. 5 similar break-ins over 6 months, all late at night, all isolated houses. One report mentioned a woman in her 30s who surprised the intruder and ended up hospitalized with stab wounds. That's when I stopped telling myself it was just some harmless thief. I'm grateful the siren worked and the cameras gave me proof, because it probably saved my life. Even now, in a building with security, I wake up at 3 a.m. and check my phone. Last summer, me and my roommate Kate moved into a 3rd-floor apartment in an old brick building in uptown Minneapolis, a 3-bedroom place with high ceilings, original wood floors, and rent we could barely afford, even splitting it in half. We were proud of it anyway, like we were finally adults. The building had a stiff front door, a mail area that always smelled like wet cardboard, and an intercom panel by the entrance with a bunch of scratched-up buttons. Our unit was 3B, right above the stairwell. Kate joked the place was haunted by bad wiring and landlords. About a month later, late July, when the last boxes were flattened and the couch was finally against the right wall, something weird started. Every night at exactly 10:30, our intercom buzzed, the same sharp chirp from the kitchen speaker. I would pick it up and say, "Hello, who is this?" Nobody answered. Just silence. And once or twice, a faint breath like someone had their face right on the panel downstairs. Then a click, like they hung up. The timing was so precise it made me glance at the clock every evening without meaning to. Kate never heard it. At first, I blamed the neighborhood. Uptown has bars on every corner and people stumble home and hit random buttons when they forget a code. I even laughed about it with Kate, like, somebody's trying to get into the wrong booty call. She rolled her eyes and told me to stop talking like a 12-year-old. But it didn't stop. It happened 5 times in 1 week, always 10:30, always 3B. After that, it stopped feeling like a mistake and started feeling like someone was checking us. I started dreading it, because it felt like someone wanted me to pick up. So I started tracking it in my phone notes. Date, time, whether I was alone, and whether I heard breathing or just dead air. The pattern showed up fast, and that's what messed with my head. It only happened on nights when Kate was waitressing at the Lowry, which meant she wasn't home to hear it or back me up. Weeknight shifts, weekend shifts, didn't matter. If she was gone, it buzzed. If she was home, nothing. That's when I stopped calling it annoying and started calling it targeted. I even tested it, like an idiot, by not answering twice. After the 10th buzz, I told Kate and showed her the list. She tried to be rational and said maybe the intercoms were glitchy, so we asked our neighbors. Mrs. Chen in 3A said her handset hadn't buzzed in weeks. The young couple in 3C said never. The student in 3D laughed and said he wished people would buzz him because it meant he had friends. Nobody else had this problem. That made it worse, because it meant somebody was choosing our button on purpose and choosing my nights alone. I kept thinking, how would they know when Kate worked? The next Wednesday, at 10:30, it buzzed again, right on schedule, like a little flex. I picked up and heard heavy breathing, deeper than before, definitely a man. Then he whispered, low and calm, "I know you're alone. Kate's at work until midnight. You're alone on the 3rd floor." My stomach dropped. He knew her name and her schedule. This wasn't a drunk guy, and it wasn't a prank. I hung up so hard it clacked, then checked the peephole like that made sense. I could hear my breathing after that, and I hated that he'd made me notice it. I locked the apartment door with everything we had, the main lock, the deadbolt, the chain, then shoved a chair under the handle even though I knew it was mostly for me. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone calling Kate. She answered quick, breathy, and I told her what he said. She went straight to, "I'm leaving, screw this shift." I wanted to say yes, but money was tight and we needed money from her shift, and I didn't want some creep deciding when we could work or sleep, so I convinced her to stay. Instead, we called the police together from Kate's phone, with me on speaker so she could hear everything too. I told the dispatcher about the nightly buzzes, the exact 10:30 timing, and what the man said this time. She kept asking, "Has he threatened you? Has he tried the door?" And I kept having to say no, which made me feel ridiculous. She said an officer would come by, but it wasn't an emergency unless someone was actively trying to get in. He showed up about 40 minutes later, a young patrol guy named Austin. He listened in the hallway while Kate repeated the whole pattern, then asked me to say the words the guy used, because he wanted it exact. I could see him deciding where it fit on his mental checklist. He walked down to the entrance with us, checked the intercom panel for stuck buttons, and tested our line by having me press 3B from downstairs while Kate listened upstairs. Austin wasn't dismissive, but he was clear. No one had tried to enter. No one had said they were coming up, and breathing into an intercom wasn't something he could arrest a person for. He told us to keep documenting, talk to building management about upgrading the system, and consider putting a small camera inside our unit pointed at the door. Kate asked if they could park out front at 10:30 one night, and he said they couldn't promise it, not with higher priority calls. After he left, Kate got that tight, practical look she gets when she's done waiting for other people. She said, "Fine." Then we watch him. The next evening, Thursday, she went out at 10:15 through the service exit to the alley and stood across from the main entrance, about 30 meters away, staying in the shadow so she wasn't obvious. She held a cigarette like she was smoking, even though she didn't light it, because she wanted to look like she belonged there. Upstairs, I stayed by the intercom with my phone ready, trying to be useful and not just scared. At 10:30 exactly, Kate texted, "He's walking up." The buzz hit right after that. Same chirp, same timing. Through the peephole I saw nobody, because of course I did, but the thought of him down there pressing our button made my skin crawl. I kept my hand off the talk button and let it ring out. Kate said later he was tall, maybe 6'1", in a dark hoodie with the hood up, jeans and sneakers. He didn't glance at the other numbers, just pressed 3B like he'd done it 100 times and waited, staring at the panel. She raised her phone, turned on the flash, and snapped a picture. The light made him jerk his head toward her, and she said she felt him register her like a mistake. He froze for a second, then turned and walked off fast, not running, but close. She tried to get another photo from behind, but he turned a corner and disappeared before she could focus. When she got back upstairs, we zoomed in until the image broke into blocks, and all we had was a blurry, dark figure with no face. There was nothing to hand Austin besides tall guy in a hoodie, which is basically half the city in late summer. And after that Thursday night, the intercom never buzzed again, not once. Almost a year later, I still jump at intercom buzzes, even for delivery, and I watch strangers, like danger hides in every shadow in the alley. 3 days after that night, 2 detectives walked into the break room at the hospital where I work. I was on my lunch, staring at a sandwich I wasn't going to eat, when a clerk told me, "There are detectives here asking for you." My stomach dropped because I knew it had to be about the van. The female detective, Rodriguez, asked if I was the nurse who reported a suspicious minivan on the staff lot. I said yes. The other one, Alan, stood by the door like he didn't want the room to hear. My hands were already shaking, which made me feel stupid, but I couldn't stop it. Rodriguez sat across from me and said they found the van about 70 miles away, behind an abandoned warehouse. It wasn't just parked there, it looked like it had been living there. Inside were 3 adults with developmental disabilities. All 3 were malnourished, dirty, and dehydrated. There were buckets and old food, no bedding, and they said the smell hit the officers before they even opened the door. Then she told me the part that made my throat close up. Their guardian had been pocketing their social security checks for 2 years. He was spending it on meth and moving them around in that van so nobody would call it in. When they misbehaved, he burned them with cigarettes. Rodriguez didn't get dramatic, but her voice got tight on that last sentence. Alan asked if I'd given anyone the license plate number. I told him I wrote it down and handed it to hospital security because I didn't know what else to do at the time. He nodded and said that was what did it. Security entered it. An automatic license plate reader caught it on the highway, and they tracked it until it stopped. Without that, Rodriguez said, it could have been weeks. I started crying right there in the break room. Not quiet tears either. Full, ugly crying, because I'd had 3 sleepless nights since that parking lot. And suddenly, I knew why I couldn't shake it. Rodriguez handed me a napkin and told me I did the right thing. I kept saying, "I'm sorry," even though she told me not to. Let me back up to how it started. I work nights at a suburban hospital outside Phoenix, usually 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 3 a.m., things can get slow, and I take a smoke break by the staff entrance. Yeah, I know. Nurses smoking is a whole stereotype. But when you're running on caffeine and adrenaline, you grab whatever works. It was a Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning technically. The air was dry and warm, and the parking lot was almost empty like it always is at that hour. A few staff cars, maybe 1 visitor car. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the wall, scrolling my phone with half my brain still in the unit. Then I heard an engine. A beat-up Honda minivan rolled in with its headlights off and drove straight to the far corner, away from the lights. That was the first weird thing. There were plenty of closer spaces, and any normal person would want to be near the entrance. The van parked in the darkest spot like it was trying not to be seen. The engine shut off, but nobody got out. I kept smoking, watching, because it felt off. Every window had a blanket or sheet hung inside, blocking the view. A few seconds later I heard a moan, not loud, but distinct in the quiet. My nurse instinct kicked in immediately. Someone in that van needed help. I dropped my cigarette and walked across the parking lot toward it. As I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, I smelled it. That unwashed smell mixed with something sweet and rotten. I knocked on the window, said I was a nurse, and asked if anyone needed help. The makeshift curtain moved slightly, and I saw a face. A man in his 30s, gaunt and hollow-eyed, staring right at me. Then I saw his hands pressed against the glass. Fresh burns covered his arms, the skin raw and blistered. I pulled out my phone to call hospital security. The burns on his arms looked new, raw in spots, and he held his hands to the glass like he wanted me to notice. I said, "I'm a nurse. I'm getting help." He just stared. The second I lifted the phone to my ear, he started yelling. Not at me, at someone in the driver's seat I couldn't see. A low, angry voice answered him, and the engine roared. I jumped back as the van lurched forward. Tires squealed, headlights snapped on, and for a split second I thought it was going to hit me. It didn't. It cut toward the exit. I caught the plate under a lot light. ARK 7394. I ran back repeating it out loud. ARK 7394. ARK 7394. In the break room, I grabbed a napkin and wrote ARK 7394 before my brain could blank. My hand shook, but it was readable. Then I called security. Thomas picked up and I blurted, "Van in the staff lot. Someone inside is hurt. It just took off." He asked for the plate and I gave him ARK 7394 twice. He told me to breathe and asked if the van had tried to hit me. I said no, it just peeled out. He said, "Okay, stay inside," and I heard him typing while I talked. I told him about the blankets over the windows, the smell, the burned arms, and the yelling at whoever was driving. Thomas said he'd file a report and pass it to police, but he didn't sound too hopeful about finding them. The rest of my shift, I kept checking the windows and the cameras at the nurse's station whenever I could. Every engine noise made me look up. I still had patients, meds, charting, and I hated how distracted I was, but I couldn't let it go. When I got home around 8 a.m., I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that gaunt face and watery red eyes. I felt guilty for not doing more, like I'd watched something awful drive away. I know it's not like I could stop a van, but my brain kept trying to rewrite it. I put the napkin on my nightstand and stared at ARK 7394 like it was the only thing I'd done right. The next 2 days were the same. I checked local news, searched online, refreshed social media, anything that might mention a found van or missing vulnerable adults. Nothing. By the second night, I started thinking maybe I imagined how bad it was. Maybe the burns were old. Maybe I overreacted because it was 3 a.m. and I was tired. Then the detectives showed up. Rodriguez did most of the talking. She told me they'd found the van about 70 miles away behind an abandoned warehouse. Inside were 3 adults with developmental disabilities, malnourished and living in filth. Their guardian had been taking their social security checks for 2 years, spending it on meth, moving them around in that van, and burning them with cigarettes when they misbehaved. The photos matched what I'd smelled and seen, only worse. Rodriguez said my plate number let the automatic readers catch it on the highway, and they tracked it down fast. "You saved their lives," she said, and I didn't know what to do with that. For weeks after, I'd wake up in the middle of the day sure I heard a van outside, then check and feel sick. The nightmares were the curtain shifting and those hands, and me replaying the timing, 5 minutes later, looking away, not writing ARK 7394. What if I hadn't written down those numbers? Last spring, my husband David went on a week business trip to San Diego for cybersecurity conference, and I stayed alone in our quiet Denver suburb house in neighborhood of family homes with neat lawns and minivans and driveways. With me were 2 German shepherds, 3-year-old Bella and 1-year-old Max. Bella was almost 90 pounds and Max was still growing, but they loved everyone. Delivery guys got tail wags. Mark, David's brother, used the spare key under the mat, and they'd rush him for attention. David called them my guard dogs, and I laughed most nights anyway. Tuesday evening around 8, I was in the basement, in my little pottery corner, throwing bowls for a charity fair. I had big headphones on, listening to some ceramics podcast, and I was in that zone where you forget time. Then I felt the floor vibrate. Not like an earthquake, more like a steady thump upstairs. I paused, because it didn't match the washer or furnace. That's when I realized Bella and Max were barking, not the usual yap, but full-on barking that cut through the music. I yanked the headphones off and the sound hit me like a slap. Coming up the stairs, I heard growling too, a deep throat sound I'd only heard on walks when another big dog got close. At the top, both shepherds were at the front door. Bella's fur was up, and she was scratching so hard the white paint was coming off in strips. Max kept pacing between the door and the living room window, jumping at the glass and leaving wet nose marks. They weren't wagging. I didn't reach for the handle, because that's when it finally clicked that something was wrong. I stepped aside and moved the curtain with one finger. Outside, two people stood on our porch, a man and a woman. They both had dark raincoats with the hoods up, even though the sky was clear and it hadn't rained in days. They were standing too close to the door, not like neighbors waiting, but right up on it like they wanted to be heard through the wood. The man held a clipboard, and for a second my brain tried to file them under sales or survey, because that's safer than strangers. Bella slammed her paws against the door again. Max hit the window, then looked back at me. They knocked again, louder, using the metal door knocker we'd installed last year. It was 3 hard hits, and it echoed through the entryway. Bella growled so low it made my stomach tighten, and she showed teeth like she meant it. I didn't open the door, and I didn't do the polite thing where you crack it with the chain on. I just yelled through it, "What do you want?" The man answered, but the dogs drowned most of it out. I caught survey, neighborhood, and a couple minutes. I stayed back, watching his hands, waiting for him to leave. The man hesitated like he was deciding if I'd cave and open up. Then he started backing off the porch, slow, eyes flicking between the window and the door. The woman stayed close to him, not looking at me, just staring at the dogs. I could see Bella's shoulders bunch every time the knocker moved, like she was ready to launch. Max kept running back and forth, building speed, and I remember thinking he was going to hurt himself. Then he did it anyway. He sprinted from the room and hit the door with his body. Boom! The frame shook. That was the first time I felt grateful for their size instead of annoyed by it. The woman leaned in and said something to the man, quiet, like they didn't want me to hear, and he glanced toward the street like he was checking for anyone watching. I stayed behind the dogs and didn't move, because I didn't want to show them where I was. The porch light was on, and it made their coats look darker. I didn't answer. The man finally spoke clearly, not to me, but to her. And he said, "Yeah, let's get out of here." They turned and walked down the path to the street. Not fast, but not slow, like people who had finished a normal errand. That bothered me more than if they ran. They did not look back, did not wave, did not try the wrong house thing. Bella kept barking after they reached the sidewalk. Max stayed at the living room window, whining, doing that stiff little hop like he wanted through the glass. When the man finally stepped off our lawn, Bella stopped and just watched. I grabbed my phone off the kitchen table with clay still on my fingers and called David first. It rang until voicemail. I knew he was in a conference room somewhere, but it still hit me hard that I could not reach him. I left a message anyway. "Hey, it is me. 2 strange people came to the door with hoods up and a clipboard. The dogs went crazy and they left. I am fine. Please call me back." I did not want to go back to the basement, so I stayed near the front hall. Then I pulled up the non-emergency number from that neighborhood safety meeting last year and dialed it. I almost called 911, but nothing had actually happened yet. The dispatcher answered and I started talking too fast. She cut in, calm, and said, "Slow down. Start from the beginning." I described the man and woman, about 30 to 40, dark raincoats with their hoods up even though the weather was clear, standing too close to the door, the man holding a clipboard like a prop. She asked if they showed a badge or gave a name. They did not. She put me on hold. I listened to the line hiss. When she came back, her voice was more careful. "We have had reports in your area," she said. My stomach clenched. She told me that in the last 2 weeks there had been 3 attempted break-ins in our neighborhood and 2 adjacent ones. The targets were houses where women were alone or home with small kids. The suspects knocked in the evening between 7 and 9, pretended to be doing surveys or collecting signatures, and tried to get people talking about who lived there. Then they returned later, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, when people were asleep. Hearing that made the earlier clipboard feel less harmless and more like planning. I thanked her, but hands shook. I asked what I should do right then. She said keep every door and window locked, do not go outside to check, and call 911 if they came back, even if it was just knocking again. She said a patrol car would drive through in about 20 minutes. I stayed in the kitchen with my phone in my hand. Bella stood in the entryway, ears up, staring at the front door. Max laid down facing it, still whining under his breath. No music at all. The officer came by later, but the couple was long gone. I checked the peephole before opening anything and talked with the screen door shut, the dogs pressed behind it. He wrote down what I saw and said, "If you see them again, call 911 immediately. Do not wait." He also told me to move the spare key, and I did. The next day, I installed a doorbell camera and set alerts on my phone. David wants a full alarm system now, and I do not argue. Every evening since, I put 2 beef bones on the floor for Bella and Max each night. My brother Michael worked as a bartender at a small wine bar called The Cellar in Seattle for 2 years. It was a cozy 20-seat place in the Capitol Hill Historic District, specializing in wines from Napa Valley and small boutique Oregon wineries. The bar opened at 4 p.m. and worked until midnight Monday through Thursday, until 1 a.m. on weekends. The clientele was mostly affluent and calm, which was kind of the whole selling point. Lawyers, doctors, managers from nearby offices came after work to relax with a glass of good wine and talk business in low voices. The lights stayed dim and jazz played from the speakers, not loud enough to drown anyone out, just enough to keep things from turning loud. Michael loved the job. Tips were good, regulars were easy, and the conversations stayed boring in the best way. He also liked learning wines from co-owner Dan, a sommelier with 30 years of experience. Dan would have Michael taste new bottles on slow nights and then quiz him, not like a teacher, more like, "What do you think?" It made Michael feel like he was building a skill instead of just pouring drinks. The incident that made Michael reconsider his career choice happened in his second year, on a cold October Wednesday evening. It was around 8 p.m., and the bar was about half full. Maybe 10 customers sat at small tables by the windows and along the wall, drinking wine and talking quietly. Michael stood behind the long wooden bar counter, polishing glasses with a clean towel, doing that steady work that makes a shift feel smooth. He was chatting with regular customer Steve Harrison, a lawyer from the neighboring office who came almost every Wednesday after work. Steve was mid-complaint about a client, not angry, just drained. Then the entrance door opened, letting in a gust of cold October wind, and a man walked in. He was about 45 years old, tall, wearing an expensive black wool coat, but with disheveled hair, red eyes, and unshaven stubble. He closed the door with a sharp movement and walked heavily to the bar. The man didn't ask for a menu or look for a table. He dropped onto a high stool and put his head down on folded arms like his body finally gave up. Michael approached out of habit and because you don't ignore someone who looks like they might pass out. He took a clean glass and politely asked what the man would be ordering. The man raised his head and looked at Michael with a cloudy, bloodshot gaze. In a hoarse voice, he asked for a double whiskey, preferably Johnny Walker Black. Michael kept it polite and calm. With an apologetic smile, he explained that this was a wine bar, and they didn't have hard liquor at all, only wines. A large selection of reds and whites from different regions, and he could help pick something if the man wanted. The man waved his hand irritably, like swatting a fly, and said, "Then give me a bottle of the strongest red you have." Steve went quiet and watched, like he'd decided this wasn't normal. Two people glanced over, then looked away. Michael nodded and suggested a Cabernet Sauvignon Reserve from Napa Valley with 15% alcohol content, one of the most robust bottles they carried. The man nodded in agreement without really listening. Michael brought the bottle, showed the label as usual, uncorked it with a professional movement, and poured a standard tasting portion into a large Bordeaux glass. The man didn't even smell the wine like normal customers did. He just grabbed the glass and drank it all in one gulp like a shot of vodka, grimaced from the tannins, and asked for more. Michael had served fast drinkers before, but this felt like someone trying to get past a point of no return. He didn't want to make a scene by refusing right away, and he didn't want the man to snap in front of everyone, so he kept his voice out of it. He silently poured again, watching with growing alarm. The man again emptied the glass in one swallow. It kept going for about 20 minutes. The man drank that Cabernet like it was something to get through fast, not something to taste. Michael watched him get looser and louder and kept checking the other tables. The man began commenting on customers in a raised voice. He looked at two men by the window and said, "Office rats," and then called them drones. They didn't answer. They just stared at their glasses. Then he turned to two women at the next table and made obscene remarks about their appearance, loud enough that they heard him clearly. The women went stiff and looked at each other. Michael leaned across the counter and kept his tone firm. He told the man to keep his voice down, that he was bothering other guests, and if he didn't calm down, they would have to ask him to leave. The man laughed, called Michael a snob and pretentious, and demanded another bottle of the same Cabernet. Michael shook his head. He said the man had already drunk almost a whole bottle in 20 minutes, and he couldn't serve more. He told him to stop, pay, and go home in a taxi. The man shot upright so fast his stool tipped backward. He reached over the counter, grabbed Michael by the collar of his shirt, and yanked him close with unexpected strength. Their faces were inches apart. Michael smelled sour wine breath and saw red eyes with wide pupils. The man hissed, slow and threatening, "Bring me another bottle, you little bastard, or I'll tear this shitty bar of yours to the fucking ground. Understand?" Michael tried to pull away, but the grip didn't loosen. The man's knuckles went white. Steve jumped up so hard his chair crashed backward. "Hey!" he yelled. "Let him go right now!" The room froze. Someone pulled out a phone, ready to call. The man turned his head toward Steve without letting go of Michael, sized him up, then released Michael in a sharp motion. Michael's hands shook after he got loose, but he stayed working anyway. He grabbed the almost empty bottle from the counter by the neck and threw it at Steve's head. Steve ducked. The bottle flew over him and shattered against the brick wall behind him with a deafening crash. Glass shards scattered across the floor, and red wine ran down the pale plaster. Two women screamed, and one immediately started dialing 911. Dan Connors, a former Marine who served in Iraq, burst out from the staff door. He took one look and said, "Friend, you need to leave right now, right now." The man tried to punch him with a sloppy hook. Dan blocked it, turned him around, pulled his arms behind his back, and walked him to the exit holding his wrists. The man struggled, tried to kick, and shouted threats that he'd come back and burn the place down, that he knew people, that they'd all regret it. Dan pushed him outside, shut the door, and turned the lock. The man pounded on the door for another minute, then stopped. Michael was already on the phone with police, voice shaking as he explained what happened. Officers arrived 10 minutes later. Two came in, Michael and Dan gave statements, and Steve backed it up as a witness. Outside, police found the man sitting on the sidewalk across from the bar, slumped against a lamppost, too drunk to stand. They got him up, handcuffed him, and walked him to the patrol car. During the search, they found a butterfly knife in his coat pocket, closed.